This is the Podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the Podcast, and today we are live with the one and only Moses. Let's get right to it.
No talk back. You see the green cat?
Yes, indeed. Y'all know what it is. This is the Podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. This is the Pod, and we got Moses on. Appreciate you for joining.
Absolutely. What up, what up, what up? Pleasure.
Definitely looking forward to having this conversation. It might go in tangents. It might loop back around because it's going to go all over the place. But I want to just start by asking this question first. What is Black August and who gets the credit for the idea?
Let's start with how it started. It can only be one person that takes the credit, right?
Somebody's got to have the spark. Somebody got to have the where it all just stemmed from. Somebody's got to have that initial light bulb.
Right. So I'm going to take that credit as the initial spark. I'm going to follow that up by saying that it would be nowhere close to where it is today if I hadn't brought in the people who I brought in. So I had the idea of bringing together a number of friends to create an event. At the time, Durham was changing drastically.
What time period we talking?
This is probably the summer of 2014. Okay. And the initial conversation started with one of my best friends, Derek Beasley, who I had went to high school with. He had just moved back, but a couple years ago, we had put on this event when he was still living in Atlanta called No Tape Backs. And that was actually the premise to Black August, in that we wanted to, at the time we were old, but we wanted to bring Durham folks out together. So we did this really dope event over in Falls Lake. But, a couple years later, Durham was changing. What was once, indistinguishably a Black city was quickly changing. Culture was quickly changing. And we had recognized that, and we wanted to create a space that was unapologetically Black and publicly voice our pride in our Blackness. And that began the conversation. I quickly looped in Janelle Henry, who I also went to high school with in Durham, and also Crystal Taylor and Joshua Gunn, who's a Durhamite as well. With all of us, that's how the conversation started. I pitched the idea, folks were vibing with it. We started coming up with an idea that at the time we thought would bring, a couple hundred folks out. But that first year in 2015, we had about 1,000, I would say, and was pleasantly surprised and have been moving ever since.
2015 was the first Black August event. And the next one is August 26th of this year. So that is how many years now of running this event?
It's 8 years. However, we have in that period taken a break one time. It was by force. It wasn't, we didn't want to, but 2021, we took a break, which was interesting because 2020 is when COVID broke out. And we were like, nah, we still gonna have this event. So that was the 1 year that we did it. We didn't do it in Durham. We did it in Raleigh. We rented out the state fairgrounds, which was crazy. We said, we're gonna have a pull-up event. We're gonna have Black August pull-up, where we got everybody to come in their cars. We painted. I had a homeboy who came and painted the field in large squares so that everyone who bought a ticket to the event could park their car there and get out their car and stay in their squares. So everyone who wanted to be safe in terms of COVID and the pandemic was safe. We rented a stage and we did a virtual event so you could tap in virtually as well. And it was a vibe. And we, the next year, we thought that we were over the hump of COVID. We had planned to do it in Central Park like we did it in the past, but there was another spike in cases. We at the last minute decided not to do it. But other than that, it's been 8 years strong, 7 events, and this year we'll make one more.
Excuse me. So we'll talk about this, but one of the guests that I had on the pod, Quay, it's an
My man.
episode called Over Yonder, met his wife at Black August. And so this
I'm
event,
well aware.
this event is pretty significant in the area, and to kind of hear the beginnings is nice to hear. But I wanted to start there, but also take a step back because you've been in Durham for a while. But I'm curious, like, where were you actually born?
I was actually born in Durham, North Carolina. I went to Kenya right after that, but
What hospital were you? Were you like a Lincoln Hospital, Durham Regional Hospital, or
I'm a
or
Durham
like
regional baby.
Durham Regional baby? Okay,
There you go.
hey, shout out to Durham Regional. These are things that don't get mentioned that much. So shout out to Durham Regional, man. Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
all right, so you're actually born in Durham.
I got my papers. They can't kick me out. They can't kick me out.
So born and raised in the city, and your family is from where?
Kenya. East Africa, the western part, Nyanza province to be exact. My parents met here in the United States of America. They actually didn't know each other, even though their homes are like maybe 2 hours apart.
Oh wow! So I didn't necessarily plan on going there, but I'm just curious, like, as a story of immigrants meeting someone so close in America, what brought your parents over to the States?
Yeah, they both came for school. They both came here to get a college education. And at that time, my dad is an OG in terms of coming to the U.S. He came in the late 70s. At that time, there was very few Africans coming here in the United States of America. So at that time, I would call it, like, when I hear the stories from them and my aunties and uncles, there was a golden era of like African immigration, which I'd say was from like 70s, the late 80s. There weren't that many of them. There was a network, which meant that when my dad, who went to Central NCCU, would hear about a party in Ohio, there would be a caravan of folks driving up to Ohio for the weekend because they were going to a party with one of their folks over there.
Wow.
So that close network of Africans is what led to my parents meeting, who my mom, who when she first came, was in Ohio, basically connected that way through a cousin of a friend of a friend. They got connected, and then, the rest is history. Here I am.
Wow. So your dad actually came from Kenya to North Carolina Central?
Nah, so his first stop was New York, actually.
Okay.
The way my dad tells it, he's like, he lasted one semester there, but that cold was too much for him. He had a cousin who was at NC State. His cousin said, come down to North Carolina, like the weather's nice, and that's all he had to say. He transferred to Central because of the weather.
Okay. Yeah. And did he ever leave Durham since coming to Central? I know you were born here, but did he leave and come back, or was this home once he got here?
This was home. So he finished Central. I think he was working. His first job outside of Central was at Hertz, and shortly after that, he became an entrepreneur here in Durham.
Okay. I'm gonna be honest, right? I assumed that you were an immigrant that was born in Kenya and moved over here at some point, but you did actually move back to Kenya, I heard you say.
Yeah. So my story is I was born here. I went back after one for a very short period of time. I came back for school. So I went to kindergarten here. Came back for kindergarten. And then since then, my parents made sure that I would go back and forth in the summer. So I would say that I was in Kenya almost every year, or if not every other year, growing up. So I had, I was in two different worlds throughout my adolescence.
When I went to Africa, I went to Kenya so when I went to Africa the first time, I ended up going to Kenya.
Okay.
Transformative experience, just going to Africa in general, but spent time in Nairobi, spent time in Mombasa.
Okay.
And the exposure for, say, someone like myself who grew up in Durham and had never really left Durham until really mid-20s and older, where I started like getting on a plane here and there and going places, right?
Mhm.
That experience was just eye-opening and mind shifting, and just in how I perceived even my upbringing, how I perceived like opportunities that were available to me. It really just gave me a different perspective. If somebody like yourself at a young age going back and forth between them two worlds, I'm curious, like, how do you think that impacted your perspective growing up versus maybe growing up around some of your peers who, the story of a lot of that grow up in Durham is they kind of stay in this radius. Like, not many of us leave. So I'm curious, what was that experience like growing up, having had experienced both of those worlds?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that what you experienced as an adult, I experienced it and I guess was conscious of it also as an adult. I think as a child is very different when you're growing up. I was very conscious of these two different worlds, but I think as a child at least, I did a really good job of distinguishing the two. And when I was in this world, I was in this world completely. When I was in that world, I was in that world completely. So I didn't necessarily growing up really actually say like, you can say like, wow, like this opportunity that I have has been made more clear to me. I didn't necessarily, that there wasn't a clarity in that way for me. There was just a difference in that I'm in two different worlds and I shapeshift depending on how I am or where I am in that regard. But that being said, I think as I got older, I did become conscious of those things. And I think that at the time, even though I was unaware of it, my parents did a good job of making sure they instilled the values and the gratitude that was necessary based on where they've come from. It's interesting. I think that there was a slow burn in that regard. What you experienced in one trip, I think it slowly came into fruition for me.
Interesting. I appreciate you sharing that, because like you said, it's maybe because I didn't have the exposure early, I put so much emphasis on the importance of the exposure. Just being able to, experience things outside of your norm, it really does help give you a different a different lens to view life through. It's like, oh, okay, like it could be this, it could be that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so the fact that you're born in Durham
Mhm.
with two parents who are not from the States, both from Kenya. Are they of the same tribe? Both of your parents?
They are from the same tribe. Yep.
Oh, wow.
That's a very good question. Yeah, they are from. Yeah, they are.
Okay, now let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of people don't know, like, when we talk about tribes, the likelihood of not just meeting someone like from Kenya being over here in that time period, but from the same tribe as well.
Mhm.
Like, just talk to me a little bit about the landscape of tribes in Kenya in terms of number of tribes and name of your tribe. Just can you talk to me a little bit about that to enlighten the folks?
Kenya is a very large country. There's over 56 different ethnic groups or tribes in Kenya that speak different languages, several dialects. So even if you talk about a particular tribe, they may be very similar to another tribe, but they have a little bit of a difference in dialect. That being said, there's probably 4 major tribes in Kenya that are the majority of the population: Kikuyu, Luo, Kisi, Maasai. Oh, and Kalenjin, sorry. The runners.
Beside them that be jumping crazy, right? Like with the
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I said 4, but there's 5 major ethnic groups. And depending on your ethnic group, so let me take a step back. I think culturally, and it's funny, in traveling in the continent, I've seen there's things that distinguish our tribes in Kenya from other tribes, whether that's colonial, cultural, I don't know. But in Kenya specifically, I think that we are tied to our homeland, and that means our tribal land. That being said, we have different, even when it comes to Swahili or English, we have different ways of talking, moving. Culturally, we're just different. And so the fact that, and not to say that you can't, marry each other like different tribes, but the fact that for my mom and dad, it is kind of crazy that they came to the States and found their tribesmen and was able to create a unit and a family together.
Like, in terms of those differences, like, tell me, is this fair or unfair to say? Now, are you
You trying to get me in trouble, man.
No. Do you happen to watch Game of Thrones?
I do, yes.
So you
Avid
know how
watcher.
all these different pockets of being in the north, being in the south, this part is like this part is like this. Would you say that might be like a similar?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to generalize it like that. Yeah, I think it's
Oh,
fair.
and and like for me, that was one of the things. Like this is going on like a whole other kind of tangent, but I'm gonna be honest, right? Like, because when you grow up here, it's very black and white.
Right.
It's like, oh, it's an issue.
Yeah.
White folk did it. Like it's like
Yeah.
very clear. Like it's
Right.
black and white.
Yeah.
But then when I went to Kenya, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
gonna be honest, like you see real poverty. And if you go to a village, right, like you see real poverty, but then you also see this unique ability to live off the land in a way that you can't necessarily live here. So this balancing act. But I say that to say the inequality gap. You know, growing up here in the United States, I always viewed that from a black and white lens. But then upon going to Kenya and seeing the distribution of inequality as it relates to income and wealth, I started to look at that lens way different, just personally. Made me say, like, I know that whites were here and they are playing a role, but what I see is very like quote unquote black on black. Do you think that it's like a tribal thing why certain things are divided the way it is over there, or like I'm just curious for somebody who might have a different perspective, because I've always viewed things like we're supposed to be black sticking together, but then when I went over there, I was like, I could see differences and divides in wealth and power, and I saw classes, but they weren't racially separated. So
That's right.
It was
Yeah.
interesting to see.
Yeah. So first of all, let me preface this by saying that like my cousins over there would want me to say that, you know, I am Kenyan American, right? So, you know, I'm gonna tell you my thoughts. And this is someone who's also an outsider, although connected, right?
Right.
I want to make sure I say that because, you know, living on the ground is different from living from outside looking in, right? That being said, you're right. Like I think it's much more complex. I think that in Kenya specifically, there are tribes who, you know, there are people who you like, which one would say here like racially distinguishes one another. I think tribally people are saying like, hey, I'm different from that person because we're not from the same tribe. And because of that, that causes like, well, they don't deserve, or I need, or we deserve, it's our turn, it's their, you know, there's a conflict in that. But even on top of that, similar even to the US, there is a ceiling in which no matter what tribe you're in, there's a money, you have a certain amount of wealth, gives you the privilege and opportunity to play chess and play politics, if you will. And oftentimes, just like the colonizers, just like, you know, white people here, they use that to their advantage, because guess what? If tribes are put against each other, it makes it easier to rule over a nation. They just happen to all be the same color. So it's both ends, I think, right? It's different because in Kenya, it's never been about race. It's been about tribe. It's been about ethnicity.
Word. I appreciate that insight from just a perspective that is unique. Like you said, you grew up here, spent time there in the summers, and you said you kindergarten. So can we just shout out some of the schools these schools you went through from kindergarten to high school in Durham, just to let people know?
Yeah, I have a very interesting and tattered school history. So I went to
Tattered.
I went to Bethesda Elementary School. That's on Ellis in Miami, which was very country at the time when I went there. I don't know if that was even city limits when I started going there, but
very true.
I went there, which is very different now, Bethesda. For middle school, I started at Shepherd Magnet Middle School, which was extra black, so much, so many good friends in education, both culturally and educationally. I then switched to Duke private school for 7th and 8th grade. I finished middle school at Duke Private Middle School. And then I went to Riverside, which I finished high school from 9 to 12.
That's quite a mix, I have to say.
All like, different types of districts, different demographics, everything.
Yeah.
Different classes, all of that.
So why did you go to private school and why did you go back to public?
That's a good question. So before I went to private school, I remember my parents asking me if I wanted to go. At the time, like even before that, you know what, my mom I think my mom and my dad did a really good job because even I remember I would go to Durham Academy for like summer programs at some point, like, but they wanted me to see both sides. And just to add into that mix, I went to a predominantly white church, Duke Methodist, so I was always like in various different worlds. And I think my parents did that purposefully to make sure that I was aware of the differences in Durham and also connected in various ways, in various circles. But they asked me if I wanted to go to private school. And at the time I thought that was an adventure to me. So it was like, ooh, a private school, that's cool. And to be honest, what sold me as a sixth grader was that they still had recess. So they had a time that was like, yo, so I get recess? Say less. I'm there.
Right.
Yeah. But being in that space, I'll be frank with you, being in that space, it took a very short time for me to I also retreated socially because I was one of 2 Black kids in the whole middle school.
Oh, wow.
And I think very quickly, like, I just felt like I just like kind of like just
that's not an average Durham experience to be like one of 2 Black kids. Like that doesn't sound like Durham at all.
And I think that was probably the first time I was just very aware of my race. In a way that I don't think I had been before. But, my reaction to that was kind of retreating into myself socially, which, I became a hermit, to be frank. Like I found myself, my sister at the time went to Lowe's Grove. So she stayed at Lowe's Grove, went from 6 to 8. And I would find myself like going to the football games, like chilling with her friends and like connecting with folks over there. Needless to say, like when I was done with Duke, when I finished middle school, I was very, very ready to go to a public setting where there was a diverse background, and felt like I would flourish there. So that was my experience.
Okay. That's interesting because I know I first became like racy in elementary school. Like,
what does racy mean? What does racy mean to you?
Like, for me, man, like, I'm gonna be honest. So I got put in anger management in elementary school.
Oh, wow.
In retrospect,
like
I did
anger management, like within the school.
Yeah, they had me in a couple programs. They had me in a joint called the Buddy Program. That was like where you had like a buddy, like a peer to like talk to you and stuff like that. But then I got put in a more formal program called Duke Coping Power. And in retrospect, they're collecting this data about me and paying me for participating in the form of like gift cards and stuff like that. I know that in retrospect as an adult. As a kid, I'm just like showing up thinking I get free pizza, gonna talk to some other kids for a while, get asked a few questions. They're gonna follow me throughout. They actually met with me from like either 3rd grade through high school. Like they really follow my whole trajectory through elementary, middle, and high school. And I got recommended for this program because I was acting out in elementary school. And I was acting out in large part. I think I just didn't have the tools to cope with the lack of father issues that I had. Like I had father issues, daddy issues. They never really go away, frankly. But these issues turn themselves into acting out and really being like rebellious in a crowd, like down for whatever. And I remember telling teachers in elementary school, go tell that white boy to be quiet. Like, because I felt like I would get pointed out for, the class gets loud. Everybody's being quiet, being social, but you need to be quiet. And I'm like, man, go tell that white boy to be quiet. And I remember saying stuff like this in elementary school, right? And so I ended up getting suggested for this program to deal with my anger. That program, I look at that in retrospect, like that's when I became racy because I remember being in public school. I went to Forest View. I went to George Watts Kindergarten, Forest View 1st through 5th. And at Forest View, which is a completely different side of town than where you were, Bethesda, right? Forest View literally opened the first year I was in 1st grade. So it's a brand new school at that point. And I just felt I could feel that I was being treated different than other people around me. That was my personal feeling.
Elementary school.
Yeah, no question. No question. I personally felt it. That was me.
Was
Yeah,
there
go
like a
ahead.
lot of what was the rate? What was the percentage of black kids
It's a
at
nice
Forest
mix,
Riverside?
like 50, Durham was like half and half, essentially. Like, you had Hispanic kids, Asian kids in the mix, but it was like
Mm-hmm.
maybe 40%, 30%, and then the rest were Hispanic or Asian, for example.
Mm.
It was a nice mix. It really was a diverse mix all through K through. I felt like I could feel certain things in elementary school that made me feel like I was being singled out because of something that I don't know if why I attribute it to race, but that's what I at a young age attributed to. You felt it in middle school.
Well, wait. I'll say that my situation is different from yours because I was the only black. I was the only black kid. So
Right.
I think that, and this is not to even go on my class, but like even if they treated me the same, right? I'm the only black kid. That's an experience right there. Like you the only one that's
Especially
different.
in Durham, yo. I can't imagine being
Yeah.
that's a different class. Like you talk about class, like that speaks to the classism of because when you're in a public school in Durham, like I don't care what the public school is, it's gonna be people of color everywhere, all colors. Like it's just Durham's kind of in the mix like that. But once you start going in certain pockets, that's where you start to find that lack of diversity, especially over the last few years, kind of getting ahead. You mentioned Black August, sort of the inception of how it began, but before we get to that, you had that experience at Duke Private. What sort of was like the shell shock moment at Riverside where you was like, okay, this not private school no more?
I didn't, man. I was so happy to be at Riverside, to be honest, to be at a public school. It's interesting because so I go into Riverside, I'm in like, these honors classes or what have you. And I remember, like, I want to say after my sophomore year, my junior year, I opted to go into like the regular English class because in my honors and like these AP classes, it was the same thing. I felt the same way.
Yeah.
And I realized something about myself. Like I was just more comfortable and I could be myself in a way. I'd just be more comfortable when I was with my people. I said, you know what? No, I don't want to do AP English. I'd much rather do standard. And yeah, and like the way that I performed in that class from the previous class when I was in the honors class of just earlier was night and day because I felt more comfortable. And it's probably a me thing, but like I say that to say like I was ready, like I was very happy and willing, excited to go to Riverside when I was coming in. It wasn't a concern in the world. And you have to remember, and I also add, like when I was at Shepherd, Shepherd had just became a magnet school, right? So this was a black school in the way that like it was probably 95, 96%.
No,
black.
Shepherd is black.
Yeah, it was just a black school, man. Like I came in, I left that and went to Duke. So I was shell shocked from Duke. When I went to Riverside, I was like, oh,
sense of relief.
Okay,
yeah.
like so that's where I was coming from.
Okay, so at this time period, one of the things that, or I'll say, how I came to know of you in the Durham area originally had to do with your family's restaurant. I'm curious as to what year that restaurant first opened.
Yeah, so the restaurant first opened in 1988. So there's been
the same location on Broad Street or
no?
Okay,
no. So this is the story of the Palace International. My parents who are immigrants. At the time, like my dad graduates, he has his job. He's like one of the first people in the community to have a house. If you're the first person to have a house, essentially that means that becomes the spot. That's the meetup spot. That's the pregame spot. That's the chill spot. That's the party spot. Everybody and anybody who was in like his community came to his spot and it was always live. It came to the point where they were like, yo, we need to open up our own spot. Like we need to open up our own spot. And at the time, it's not just Kenyans. This is everybody. This is anyone and everyone who are immigrants essentially in the Durham area. And they're like, yo, let's open up our own spot. They opened up the Palace International, and the initial location was where the new Bull Stadium is now, the new one, where the third base is in that stadium. There was a building there, and that's where his building was. That's where
Yo,
the
that's
original palace
crazy.
is.
That
They
is
outgrow.
crazy.
So they're there for like, I want to say 3 years. They outgrow it. And in that time, the Palace International is essentially a club. It's not even a restaurant. It's a club first and foremost. That's where the Palace is. My mom comes in, who's now married to my father, and is like, yo, people are hungry. People have been drinking all night. They need to eat. My mom gets in the kitchen. That's her thing. So she starts serving bar food. You know, they outgrow the spot. Then they moved to Parish, 117 Parish Street, which is currently now where the one city center is. That big spot right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my dad moved to the building, eventually bought that building there. And again, this is in downtown Durham is very
like
different from today.
what year did they move to that location?
They moved to that location, I want to say in 1991, maybe.
And this is like when that was a CCB downtown.
CCB was right across the street. Yep.
CCB was right across the street. So you're telling me your pops bought that building?
Woolworths was right beside them.
Correct.
Woolworths was right beside them, and it was them. It was Woolworths, the Palace International. There was a bookstore at the time that was right there. Across the street was M&F, and then on the other side across the street was CCB. Yeah.
And your pops bought that building at the time?
Yeah.
Without getting too much into your pop's savvy business here, like, like, what was the cost roughly of the real estate there at the time in 1991?
I actually I've never talked numbers with my father, but I do know that at that time in 91, my friend, downtown Durham was owned by it was very black. And interestingly enough, what I remember talking to him, he was like, there's a lot of jazz artists who owned buildings and properties there, minus M&F. But you know, it was all black owned. I don't know how much he bought it for. I know that, like, yeah, you know, and it wasn't like and it wasn't, you know, and my dad didn't hit him with the like, oh, how much for the building? Here you go. It was more of a negotiation. It was more of like, all right, listen, I'm willing to pay you X amount. It was like a pay to own type.
No disrespect, Kenya's gonna negotiate. I know that for a fact. Kenya's gonna negotiate. I know this for a fact. Like, I know this for a fact, man.
Yeah, and you know, it's not prime property at that time. Everyone, this is white flight, you know, so everyone is leaving downtown Durham. What you have is a lot of the white folks at the time were just going to the county areas. They were going to suburban areas, and you know, downtown was kind of desolate, really.
It was, Joe. Like, that's what you're describing is that era. Like, you were almost afraid to go downtown in the 90s. Like,
no,
it was like,
you don't go.
You going? Like, yeah, exactly.
You don't go.
Like, you
don't
got a
go.
court date? Okay, yeah.
You don't go.
You got to go to the post office? Oh, okay. Otherwise, why are you even going downtown? It's not for fun. It's not for leisure. It's not to hang out. It's to go to either the courthouse or to the post office and get up out of there.
Very different world than today. You don't go except for those things you said. And to kind of like put a nail in that point is that, like, my mom, who was, again, they had a kitchen. As they moved to this new location, the restaurant part was only open for lunchtime when all the city workers were there, and then they closed, really, and then it was just a club in the evening. Again, it was primarily a club. The Palace International didn't become formally a restaurant until its third iteration, which was when it was on Broad Street.
That's very interesting because I've always known it as a joint on Broad Street, but speaking to my age here, like, what year did you, so you got at that unit when you left that unit, or that building rather, right there at the City Plaza, to go to that location that I know of in on Broad Street? What year was that they opened up on Broad Street?
I want to kind of backtrack a little bit because I told you my dad had owned the building, and just to finish that chapter of the location. So what happened was the Palace International had a good run, a very good run. And it was the premier spot, not only in Durham or North Carolina, but the East Coast for international music. So at the time in the early 90s, my dad was bringing bands from the continent, Congo, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Nigeria, like Fela Kuti came to the Palace International in Durham. And this was my father who was getting these folks to come in here. People
How'd
were
your
traveling.
father had these connections, man? What your pops do, man? Like, this sound like a cool man. What is he doing to get these connections? Because this is not like average connections to bring these acts over, especially internationally at this time. What's his background to have that?
I'm going to be humble like my dad would be humble and say that. So my dad came up, before he came here, he was an avid music listener. He was a DJ at the time in Nairobi. But I don't think that that's the reason he got his connection. I would say it was two things. One, just the hustle. He's a hustler. And then two, I would say that, again, you're talking about the early 90s. No one was out here checking for African music, let alone even like Caribbean music.
Right.
The only people who were checking for that were the Caribbeans and the Africans.
Right.
What he did was found there was a vacuum in the space. He created a location for it. And he had a circuit in which, okay, if Fela is touring the North American spot, there's only 3 places or 4 places in the East Coast of America that he's going to come to: New York, DC, Durham, North Carolina, and Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
And so I think what he did was he didn't become cool with the artists. He became cool with the other venues.
Mm-hmm.
And they created a circuit. So what would be like similar to like what the Chitlin circuit was in its day, they created their own circuit to make it viable for a Caribbean or an African artist to come and tour in this area. So anyway, to finish the story, the Palace was primarily a space for these things to happen. So he became connected with the Caribbean. At that time, he became cool with the West African cultures. Central Africans were popping. Lingala music was popping then. These are all artists he was connecting with and bringing them to Durham. And people were coming from Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, whatever, to come and like see these people. And to supplement that income, the restaurant was happening at lunchtime. So all the city workers in Durham knew, like, yo, if I want to get some fried fish, Palace, that's my spot. That's where I'm going to go. Because there was, again, a vacuum there. There was no restaurants in downtown Durham.
Right.
There were no restaurants. There was a time where there's probably 3 restaurants. And one of them was McDonald's, which is now closed or gone. But 3 restaurants in the proper downtown area. They were supplementing off of that too. So anyway, that has this time. I think my dad reaches an age where he's like, okay, it's time for me to hand this off. He finds someone who he can lease the building to, and he leases it to someone. And I want to say maybe 2 weeks before opening, there's a huge fire that happens.
Oh, wow.
In that building, and yeah, the fire starts on the roof. The insurance calls it an act of God. They said it was lightning, or it wasn't. Shortly said like, hey, we're not going to cover 100% of it, but the building burns down, and the roof caves in. There's no, this building is not operable, it's operational. The city then says, listen, man, this is an eyesore, so you have to sell it. Now, and I feel like this is a whole nother podcast, because what Durham is today has been in the works for a long time. A long time.
Since the 80s, factually.
Since the 80s.
Yeah.
Since the 80s.
But let's talk about this. So you talking to a who know a little bit too. So let's talk about this. Because Durham is no accident. Let's be clear. These things take decades to develop. It's definitely a marathon, a chess game. It's not short-term planning. It's very strategic. And for the record, like, present day Durham, this piece of real estate is arguably the most valuable piece in the whole city. Arguably, if we're like being frank, like, this is, if not the most, one of the most valuable locations in the whole city of Durham, period.
Absolutely.
And so an incident happens. What year is this where this fire occurs?
2001. Again, it's a crazy.
Oh, damn.
Look. Hello. Yeah. Let me add to that. It's very coincidental. This fire is very coincidental, but I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so can't.
But some lightning struck from the roof.
The lightning struck from the roof. Roof caves in. Yeah. My dad tries to keep the building. but he's pushed by the city because it's an eyesore. That he needs to either fix it or sell it. And obviously, fixing a roof is not a small it's not a small change. You know, my dad inevitably decides to sell it.
In what year?
Does he sell it?
Yes.
Probably 2003, 2002.
And just for point of reference here, this is a time in Durham where South Point has just opened. Yes or
That's
no?
right. Yep. South Point has just opened 2002.
Okay.
2002. Yep.
So I like to highlight this because I point to South Point as a turning point in Durham's like makeup.
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing like humbly speaking, Nordstrom, like we got a Nordstrom, we got a cheesecake factory. Oh my goodness. Like, yo, we got a f***ing cheesecake, my nigga. Oh my goodness. Like this was huge.
If you were here when South Point opened, it was a big deal. And you know, for us, we were in high school. Guys, guys were skipping. It's like,
all day.
It's opening day. Let's go. Who's driving? Who's driving?
And it was
a club. It was a club in there.
I went to Jordan, so I was right down the street from the mall. So growing up, going to school at Jordan, South Point is just a part of the culture because it's right there in your backyard, right down 751. But that period at the early 2000s,
right,
that's where a lot of the groundwork started to turn, where the ship starts to turn its sails in a different direction, in my opinion. And the coincidence of what you're saying here also goes with when I graduated high school. I'm class of 05. Are you 05 or what year are you?
I'm 03.
03.
Yeah.
So I graduated 05. You graduated 03. When I finished high school versus the time when I finished college, around the time when I finished college, that was when downtown Durham started to become like, we can hang out in Durham a little bit. That little 4, 5, 6 year range from 2010 to maybe 2004, Durham, downtown Durham became something that you never visited to something that actually had a couple spots that you might hang out here and there. Do you disagree with anything I'm saying right now?
Not at all. Not at all. That is I feel like the watershed moment. South Point is fair to say is the watershed moment in which you have Durham of yesteryears and Durham of today.
Okay, before your pop sold that building, and like you said, you never talk business, so I'll leave that alone. Had they already opened up the Broad Street location?
No.
Of the palace?
So it was a reset for both of my parents. My mom ended up going back to school to Central. She did hospitality there, and eventually was hired by Marriott to be a manager for one of like their locations. And my dad opened up a gas station slash like car garages.
Oh, hold up. So, but the restaurant still lived. So
no.
So the restaurant.
So in 2001, once that fire happened, it was like there was a moment of clarity. It was like, all right, let's reset. From 01, the Palace International had ceased to exist, and they both did their thing. It wasn't until the reopening, and now this is the third location in which is in Broad Street, Durham, North Carolina, which it then came back in.
Okay, so I'm curious. At those initial locations, what was it like as a young one? What were your responsibilities, as it related to that building prior to the fire? Like, what was that like for you as a child?
So as a child, like even till today, like if I smell, like, you know how like you get a sense of a smell and it takes you back to a certain period. So for me, that's like old beer bottle caps. Like the smell of beer that's been sitting there for a while, like it has a certain smell. I remember that smell distinctly because as a kid on Fridays and Saturdays, particularly Saturday mornings, we would go to the club and we would have to sweep up all the beer and like everything that had been left from the club the night before. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It means like as a younger kid sleeping behind the bar during a club night, it means running around on the dance floor when we shouldn't have been at like 10:30 at night. It means chilling with the ticket girl at there was a little booth room that you gave your tickets to, and being in the coat check room, listening to sound check when bands were coming in. And there was a period in, especially in the 2000s, just to like Ludacris, 112, like these are people in the early 2000s that had came, and there was a period of like Club Crystals that like I think was like had a 3-year run where like these big acts were coming, because the Palace International, it was called the Palace. So the most recent Palace wasn't as big as the previous Palace. The former Palace was 3 floors. 3 floors. You come in, there's a bar. You come into the second floor. It's 2 flights of stairs that lead into the dance floor. The DJ booth at the ceiling, another stage. Then you have a basement. The stairs go into the basement. It's another floor. This is the reason why it was a big building.
That is crazy.
On the top, let me tell you, on the top there used to be a boxing club gym actually there. So the top was a boxing club gym that wasn't even open. That was like just for the boxers that would come and do boxing there. You'll talk to old heads in Durham if you hear about Club Crystals or the Palace, they know about it because they would be in there. Yeah, as a kid, man, it was being places where we weren't supposed to be. It was doing like early morning work. Like my dad would have us cleaning up like all the trash from the previous night. Taking rides out with my mom when there was catering drop-offs. That's how it was as a kid, man.
Yo, that's crazy. So now I'm even learning too, kind of what you do now was or is it fair to say there's a heavy influence as it relates to how your parents were, you know, how you viewed your parents and the type of businesses they ran? This is starting to put that bug early on, just in terms of not just being entrepreneurial, but also like in this cultural sense too, with the music and the food and everything.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And I can say that is something that I love to do, but you know, I'm but like, you know, a foot soldier in my dad's vision, right? Like I see what he did for Durham and the community at large, and I try to emulate that to the best of my ability.
They pivot after the lightning situation. They pivot.
I appreciate them quotes, man.
And so they pivot after this lightning incident, and then they're led back. What is the thing that says, you know what, let's open up a restaurant centrally focused, not so much around the social aspect, but around the culinary piece, being East African? What was the thing that led them back to that?
My mom was working at Marriott and was like, I don't want to work for any folks anymore. I need to do my own thing. I don't agree with everything they're doing or how they're doing it. And she is a full-bred entrepreneur. So it was only a matter of time before she was like, I need to do my own thing. So she says, and at the time she was stationed in Baltimore. She was in BWI airport area. And she was like, I want to move back. And that's a weird situation because, you know, to do her thing, she had to leave us as a fam. And we were chilling with my pops. But she was like, she did that for like 3 years, 2 years maybe. She was like, no, I want to come back to Durham. I want to open it up again. Yeah, she was like, let's reopen it. And this was now 2006, 2005 maybe. And she started looking for a space and trying to set up a plan to open up the Palace 3.0.
So before then, was she cooking like those East African dishes, the peanut stew and all that stuff? Like, was she cooking those East African dishes at the old Palace, or was it just that fried fish and white bread? Was y'all serving fried fish and Wonder Bread?
Yo, we were serving that. So it's, you know, like the culinary scene is so interesting today because we're in a foodie genre right now. Like everyone's a foodie in a way that like
especially here in Durham. This is a foodie city.
Especially here. It's a foodie city. But you know, that wasn't the case back then. Like it's cool to be a foodie now. But back then, so I'll distinguish like being a restaurateur today versus when my mom started the Palace. Today, authenticity is put at the highest regard. If you have something that's new, unique, something that speaks to like a tradition, that's what people flock to. During my mom's time, African food, first of all, people didn't even know what African food was.
Right.
Let alone where if you named the country in Africa where that was, in Durham,
Right.
North Carolina.
Right.
Now within Durham, North Carolina, there's even at that time you have your African shore, but now let's talk about Durhamites, right? Like, are they checking for African food? No, they're not checking for African food
Yeah.
in a way that they are now, right? So my mom, I think during her, you know, if you look at Palace 1.0, 2.0, like she was creating menus that served as like a gateway into her traditional food, you know? Oh, y'all like fried fish? We eat fried fish. I'm gonna serve y'all some fried fish. I also want to give you a side of our sukuma wiki, which is similar to collards that y'all have, you know. She kind of had to create a fusion in which that was palatable to the folks that were in the region she was in. Versus if you go back to like where we are now, like people don't want to, don't give me no like whitewashed fake shit. I want the real shit. That's what people want. So it's a very different market that we are in today. And I think the menu of the Palace has changed accordingly. So yes, back in when she started, there was some Wonder Bread and fried fish, but she made the best fried fish. I put that on anything, you know. Whereas now, okay, we're cooking whole fish, bones included. We have complementing it, you know. So we've changed over the time, but that's because the people who are frequent, our patrons, have also changed and stepped up too.
This is just a complete side note because I grew up with homies who were Kenyan, and I got exposed to ugali early before, say, I had a palate. Let's say that. So I trashed ugali. I was like, man, like,
no, hey, look, so my wife is Ghanaian. And they have their own. They have a similar. Hold
on. Because this other weekend I had fufu for the first time.
Okay.
And the way the nigga described it was like, it's like the ugali but better, right? That's how he described it, right?
Okay.
You say that, you're leaning back now. It's like,
I'm interested. This is the lean back. I'm interested.
Yeah, so I'm curious, like, all right, both of them were very unique compared to like a buttermilk biscuit or a roll, right? Like, like, it's not a piece of bread. It's this like thing. I've had Ethiopian where you use the injera and you're using that to eat the food. You got the ugali, you're using that to eat the food. And it seemed like East Africa, they're using this fufu. What do you think is just the best African bread to complement the food?
Come on, man. You know I'm gonna be biased here. I grew up with ugali, so that is my cup of tea. But I also respect every starch on the continent, whether it's fufu, whether it's cassava, whether it's injera, whether it's pap, whether it's we all have our starch that complements our stew. I was gonna say that, like, again, my wife is Ghanaian. She doesn't mess with ugali. She's like, yo, there's like no flavor here. Like, I need something, and I'm like, the flavor's in the stew. This is the vessel, So it's just how everyone has their cup of tea, man. So I'm gonna say ugali, but again, that's what I grew up on.
I'm gonna go with them buttermilk biscuits, man. Personally, I don't think nothing.
Buttermilk biscuits are good too.
I don't think none of them slap like the buttermilk biscuits, but that's, once we got over here, we had to make it work. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, and I'll tell you this. I want you to come to the crib. I know you down the street. Wifey makes the best buttermilk biscuits, man. Outside of your grandmother. I ain't going to...
Man, like, don't like, not to sound like Martin, but love biscuits, man. So biscuits with some honey or some jam, I'll tear a whole batch of biscuits up, especially if they fresh.
We can get you right on that front too.
I'm gonna have to.
But listen. I'm an ugali guy.
Ugali.
That's what I grew up on.
For the listeners out there, if you've never had it, next time you're out and about and you see these items, whether it be the ugali, the fufu, the injera, the cassava, like it's crazy how these commonalities exist, but they're just little twists between cultures, right? But that's a whole other conversation. So you've grown up in this entrepreneurial like environment that's baked around food and music and culture.
Yeah.
Are you an artist, or do you consider yourself an artist by any means? I'm curious, do you have any artistic expressions?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I seesaw back and forth from this because I have a lot of artists in my life who really devote themselves to their craft and I respect that devotion in a way that I don't do. Now,
Mhm.
in my heart, yes, I consider myself an artist. I think I have a creative eye. I love doing design work, whether that's interior, paint, oil, experience. I love it. But I also want to give space for the people who do it professionally and for a life. So I kind of stop short of calling myself an artist, but I am artistic.
Got it. Okay. Nah, man, like I feel the same way too in terms of giving respect to those who say live off of their craft, so to speak, like a professional artist, right?
Hmm.
Like that's how you pay your bills, etc. But I wouldn't sell myself short to say I'm not an artist just because I'm not paying the bills with the art. With that said, it seems like, at least to me, so at least for me, right? Like I call artists creators, essentially, people who create things. I think business is an art form to some degree.
Respect. Amen.
The fact that I know you've had entrepreneurial creations and things in different forms, like I think that's a form of creation, which is a form of expression. It's just in business, so to speak, right? That said, when the new version of the Palace came out in the early 2000s, this is around the same time you're at Riverside.
The new palace on Broad Street? No, that it was after Riverside. So it was the palace opened up on Broad Street 06, 07.
Let me
Yeah.
pause. So you graduated Riverside in '03. Where did you go to school, or what was next for you?
Yes, I went to the prestigious North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University.
All right, we can clap for them.
Let's go. My Aggies out there, respect.
It's like you said. So clearly you had a love for this, and you said, I gotta go. I can't
That's-
go to a predominant. I
honestly.
gotta go to a HBCU. Why? Like, did you have a lock on A&T? Were you looking at other schools at the time? What made you go to A&T from Riverside?
So when I left, I went to my district is Hillside. I went to Riverside for the engineering program, and I went there because I wanted to be an engineer at the time. I liked the idea of creating things. I went through Riverside with the intention to be an engineer, and then when I graduated, it was really two schools for me. It was either NC State or A&T because of their engineering programs. I wanted to be close to the fam. At the time, my dad had a business that I wanted to be a part of and help him out with. So I picked A&T because I love Black people.
Word. So you went to A&T. What'd you end up studying?
I came in as an engineer. I stayed as an engineer for 2.5 years, 2 years, did an internship, and realized, I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And went through I feel like every young 20-year-old goes through this soul searching period for a summer, and ended up switching my major into international studies and development. At the time, I thought I wanted to be in the UN, do politics stuff.
Oh, very interesting. Spent the time at A&T.
Yep.
And while you're at A&T, the restaurant is becoming a new reality.
So the restaurant becomes a reality. So I graduate North Carolina A&T 2008, 2007 is when I was supposed to graduate, but because I switched, I'm a 5-year because I switched my major. So because I switched my major, I take an extra year, and I get a job in Kenya. So I go to Kenya and work for this nonprofit in Kenya for a year and some change. At that time, when I'm in Kenya, that's when is moving over here. 07, between 06 and
What type of job did you get in Kenya?
I was working it's called African Medical Research Foundation, AMREF. I was essentially doing grassroots research work, analytical work, and I was traveling to remote areas of Kenya to interview groups of folks to figure out how the programs that we've created is working. Is this actually working? At the time, I was working at a program that administered HIV medicine. I was trying to figure out, all right, are you all taking your medicines? What's preventing you all from taking them? Like, how can we help you? Like, what are you doing? But that was a very pivotal point in my life because at the time when I left A&T and was working, I thought that I wanted to go into nonprofit work, doing like public administration stuff. But I learned, similar to you, when you went to Kenya, it was very clear to me, poverty is a real thing, but I found it interesting how like I would go to these villages and they had land.
Right.
They had opportunity, like
Land that produces even some resources.
exactly. But
Yeah.
they knew, so and so NGO is coming here on Tuesday to drop off 10 sack like bags of flour. And so is coming on Friday to drop off, 7 batches of corn or like vegetables. And they had become complacent. They had become reliant on these NGOs who were trying to help them in a way that I was like, this is not, I couldn't even be mad at them because they saw opportunity and they were taking advantage of. But at the
Right.
same time, it wasn't helping them out in the long run,
Mm.
because here I am representing this organization trying to figure out like, is this really working or nah? I realized that in that organization, even as I tried to make change, there was so much red tape because there was incentives for the folks who were running the organization to continue to keep things moving like they were.
Right.
If that makes sense. So like we're hiring consultants to make sure we're doing well, but we're picking the consultants that make sure that,
That
they
we're
say
doing well.
we're doing
Yeah.
well. So our funders continue funding us so we continue doing this work, which in turn helps the villagers who in turn don't do shit because they know they're going to get help. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I was like, yo, this red tape is crazy. Like, I really with, like, I wanted to hop into the private sector because there's an opportunity to help people for real in creative ways and visionary ways that would make people better. So I think that time in Kenya actually was very beneficial for me because it helped guide me into like, all right, I'm not necessarily into this nonprofit, feed the children, they starving, we need help. And I'm more into like, let's figure out how we can create industries out of this situation. And at
Capitalists.
the same yes.
That's what we call those.
Okay,
we call those
sure.
capitalists.
If you want to say that, that's fine. That's fine. But at the same time, it was crazy because my mom was simultaneously while I was in Kenya creating a blueprint to reopen the restaurant. And and at the time I had a girlfriend who was still here. And she, like between my mom setting up this and my girlfriend, I was like, yo, I need to be back over there. And this is an opportunity for me to like do like this entrepreneurship, that brought me back to the States. At the time the palace had opened and I dove in, like, let me see what I can do.
That's dope. Like, to me, that's dope in like the family element, which is one of the pillars of the podcast. And I think it's a prime example of why families are so important to not just like the next generation, but also to the community. Because when you have strong family structures, the fruits that come from that have such an impact on people around us too. They were the first one to get a house. Now everybody's coming to the house. Like when you have a strong family and you have strong families and communities, it changes the community around us.
Facts.
And in your case, when I hear you talk about what it was like growing up in an entrepreneurial family, artistic family, creative, just in general, and like understanding America, which is just the foresight to own that property at that time period. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if there was some lightning, the foresight to know what was going on is frankly, is to be applauded, because I know what it was like in Durham at that time. Nobody was trying to be down there. And so the fact that they stepped away, came back, and now you're coming back with more of a mindset of like, let me operate this or try to get into my family. I guess my my question is, when it comes to the restaurant business, I understand from just my own lens and research and things of that nature that is it is often referred to as one of the toughest industries to run a successful business, the restaurant industry. Now, I think that this last iteration, or the not the last, but the most recent iteration, had a good run, right? But I'm curious from your perspective, why is the restaurant industry so difficult of an industry to build a successful business?
That's a big question. So I can speak from only my personal experience, but I think that the restaurant industry has undergone like a significant change in the past 15 to 20 years, in which in various ways, let me say in various ways, but I think most significantly, there at a time when my mom, when you talk about Palace 1.0, Palace International 1.0, that was a time and a period in the 80s in which you could create a mom and pop's restaurant with your own funding, create something that was self-sustainable, drew enough revenue for you all to not only survive, but grow the business. I think that as the economics have changed and shifted, whether that's inflation, cost of living, location, people's interest and what they expect of the places they go to, it's become harder and harder for independent restaurants to create a business and a restaurant without getting funding from investors. And that funding from investors, I think, unless you're in the business, it becomes like, like, all right, what does that mean? You get someone to fund you. But what that comes with is essentially, if I was to open up a restaurant right now and you were the investor who could back me on this, I have to create an idea, an interest that serves that you think that would be viable. And if
Like a real
that
business plan.
a real business plan. And outside of that business plan, the thing is that I think that most people don't talk, I guess, openly about restaurants. The profit margin is not that big. You have, if you're a really good restaurant, 15% profit margin. Generally, I would say it was more like 8%, 10% profit margin.
And when we say profit margin, are we talking like like operating costs versus net revenue? Are we talking like are we talking like overall like expenses to what we make in a month? Like, is that what we're talking?
I'm talking about what you put in your pocket at the end of the month or the year.
Okay.
Very small. And that small profit margin is the variables into getting that profit margin. There's so many variables. At a restaurant, you're dealing with perishable items. You have to sell them or you're throwing them in the trash. You're
Right.
dealing with people who have you don't have a consistent schedule due to whether it's busy hours or not, or weekends or weekdays. You're dealing with like the rent, like all of these expenses tend to be very large in comparison to what you're charging your customer. In order to you become very dependent on volume of folks, and there's never, the restaurateur is never sure, like, and I'm talking about, obviously, if you're at a very high level, you have a waiting list. You can kind of dictate, okay, Wednesday seems like I have more open tables than normal. But generally, if you're talking about a community restaurant, every day you open up, you're not quite sure how many tables are going to be full, how many tables you're going to turn in a dinner night. It creates a guessing game. You're consistently playing chess between the people who you're employing, the operators, whether you're paying rent, the people who you're paying to get your food in. And it becomes, again, like a very, 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 very strenuous and difficult job, because oftentimes you have to know exactly what's going on at every single point of the business from beginning to end. Yeah, to answer your question, and I kind of went on a variant here, but like, to answer your question, it's hard because from when it started to where we are now, it's almost it's a necessity to have big investment in order to put your money into like creating a restaurant that you love. And that means to me, like, there's less artistry, because as an artist who's creating a menu, I can't do that by myself. I have to get investors to come in on it to say like, all right, let's go. Because every single like iteration of the palace was completely 100% funded by my parents. You know what I mean? There comes a point where like, even though like, I know this is what happened really with the palace, is that we have the capability of growing, but we don't have the backing, the financial backing to grow it. You know what I mean? The only way
You need
that we can do
that machine, that money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which just means for me that I'm there more hours of the week. So
is that what led ultimately to the vault? Like the idea of the vault? Like I'm curious because I don't remember the vault always being there. But before I get there, because the thing about that restaurant that I appreciated, especially I moved back to Durham 2017. I left Durham 2014. I remember that restaurant being there because I worked at Science and Math. I had Kenyan homies and they told me that the owners were Kenyan. So I knew of the restaurant. I don't think I went until I came back though in 2017, but I used it as an opportunity to like take my mom somewhere different that she hadn't been to taste, like, because I had been to Kenya at that point. So let me kind of give you a hint of what it might taste like or some of the things that experience. So I do appreciate what that restaurant offered, because today I don't know like where I think from Durham, from a foodie perspective, where we struggle the most is Caribbean and African cuisines. That's my opinion. Italian, French, bistro, gastropub, Southern, essentially everything you can think of is here. But when it comes to like authentic Black country dishes, I think that's where we lack. We don't really have we got Indian, we got East Asian, we got South Asian even. We got a few Jamaican spots, but we don't really have a nice, in my opinion, a nice collection of African and Caribbean flavors in the Durham city. And that was a place that helped offer that as a staple. So I have to give it its credit there. But the vault was right on. It wasn't always there for my memory. What led to the vault?
I think that at the time, it's interesting, man. I feel like the way that you succeed in the restaurant industry generally is because you have such a small profit margin, is the more locations you open up, the more essentially profit margin you have, right? So, one location, it's a small profit margin. If you open up 3 more, then you can add that, and that increases the profit margin. It makes sense.
Right.
What we did as a family in order to keep it in the family is we created several streams of revenue within that umbrella. The vault was a part of that. So outside of expanding catering, we also did events. We also opened up the vault, which was more or less like an event spot, but it was also a rental spot. And we did like, private caterings and chef classes, and we did so many things in order to supplement the small margin that generally restaurants have. The vault came about because the vault came about because of my mom. My mom was like, yo, so prior to when we went in there, it was a fencing club, and the fencing club ended up moving out, and my mom was like, I want that space. This should be like the old palace. I've always thought that it should be like the old palace, and this space will allow us to do that. And at the time, I was like, yo, Mom, we're doing too much. Like, she was like, no, Moses, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. And you know what my mom did? My mom went ahead and got it without even like, I was already like, nah. My mom was like, nah, okay. And did it. And it's like, here you go, Moses. Make it happen.
That's part of the reason why I asked this question, because it's cool hearing the background of the origins of the palace, because the new version, the origins was food, and then it led to the social scene in the vault. But that was the actual origins of it from the start. So that's very cool to hear. So your mom,
my mom always had that in her head. Like, I want this to be like 1.0 and 2.0, and that is how we're gonna do it. And even though I was concerned about that, she still did it, and she put and I'm appreciative. Like, she was like, Moses, this is yours now. She got it and was like, all right, here. Now what are you gonna do with it? There it goes, the vault.
the vault. So all right. So let me ask this, because again, some of the toughest types of businesses to run. What didn't work? Error. of the vault and palace that ultimately made y'all say, you know what, we're gonna go a different direction in the short term? What wasn't working from a
You mean
business
like why?
perspective?
You mean like why did we not continue the palace?
Correct.
You want me the you want the short answer or the long
I want to know the long answer, frankly, because I understand, like, when you start talking margins of 10%, you could arguably get that by putting your money in the market and not doing anything, lifting a finger. If you're investing
Yeah.
right, you can
Yeah.
make that much money in a year. You know.
Yeah, that's fair. And here I am working, 15 hours a day. So let me be clear in saying that, like, the Palace International could have continued to exist to this day. It was a decision, I think, by primarily myself, but I think my mom and my sister, who were also, I think, the three of us who were the decision makers in which, should we move forward, how should we move, agreed with. And I would say there's three reasons why the Palace, decided to officially close its doors. One, and I think was really important, was my mom's health. My mom, a few years prior, had gotten cancer.
Sorry to hear that.
She went through her chemo. She's doing well. She's in remission. But in that process, she also dealt with a lot of side effects. One of them was swelling. All of these side effects was like, hey, the doctor suggested that she kind of relax and like, don't just chill.
Right.
And if you know my mother even a little bit, then you know that chilling is not something she does. Her heart is in that restaurant. Like, the Palace International is her. Even throughout, like, so I would say that my sister and I took ownership and leadership of the restaurant probably in 2021. She was still make a point, even in chemo, like, to say, like, all right, and what needs to be done, like, I'm out here, I'm mopping, like, let's go. And I think that we did such, for me at least, it was so important that she took the time to, like, actually relax, not only for her health but also for her, like, retirement. Like, she had put in her time.
Yeah.
And I recognize that the Palace, if the Palace still was in existence and my mom was here on this soil, she would be in that kitchen making sure that the sauce was good, the collards were sweet, like, like, everything was on point. Like, she can't help but to do that. I think I recognize, like, wanting my mom to, like, live her best life meant that even though she would disagree fully, meant that the Palace also we had to, like, close that chapter. The second reason, to be frank, was my relationship, or our relationship with, I think, like, the landlord and the neighbors. I think it had gotten to a point where we had 3 break-ins, and these weren't like, oh, we trying to get the money out here. It was more so, at the time, I think tensions were high. We're gonna break this glass. We're going to.
You think people were trying to vandalize y'all just
No,
to
people didn't try. They did.
like, and didn't even, like, steal anything. They just want to just mess and
The
I
first-
do remember that when the glass got cracked on the front of the window, like, when you mentioned this, you think that was, like, just intentional vandalism with nothing else behind it?
No, the first time it was definitely theft. Second and third time was just vandalism. And I'd say that the community the community came, and I think they galvanized and helped support us. Like, to be frank, I want to give a shout out to the community that we were at, because I think they've always supported us, and a huge reason why I think we continued and lasted. Yeah, I can't give enough thanks to the community that was there. I mean, the locals, the regulars, they were just consistent in a way that I think that I'm always going to be grateful for. But I think that we were fighting, like, it was too much for us, in that, outside of COVID, we were also, like, making sure we were upkeeping our build, like, whether that be foundational, utility, like, outside porch area. Like we were doing all of that stuff in ways that I felt like, it's not necessarily our responsibility to do. And it was time. It was time. I mean, we had been there for 14 plus years. So, and the third reason I think honestly was because the way that the restaurant started was my parents putting in all their money, or not all their money, but saying like, we're going to put our money together and get this started. And I think at some point in a restaurant, you reach a plateau in which you need investment to grow to the next level. And that wasn't there. So we were making just enough to like continue moving forward, but I didn't see a path of growth there unless there's investment there. That investment needed to come with an understanding. I feel like it needed to come with a fresh slate versus us saying like, all right, this is how we've worked the last 14 years. This is what we need, et cetera, et cetera. For those three reasons, I feel like the pandemic gave us an opportunity to say, all right, you know what? Let's reset. And to be frank, if the pandemic hadn't happened, honestly, you'd be talking to me today and I'd be like, yo, I got an event at the vault in like 10 minutes. I gotta go. I gotta go, G. So like, you know what I mean? And I had been doing it for 14 years, mind you. So I was also at a space where I also wanted to spread my wings. Like I know that I have like talent that can be utilized in various ways. That was evident to me in me building the palace, and I wanted to have the opportunity to spread those wings and see where they take me to.
Word, man. Like the pandemic, I also credit for me being in this seat right here doing a podcast. It completely like gave everyone a reason to hit a reset and kind of like course correct in a different direction across the board. And some of that was by choice and some of that was just by force of the pandemic, because it was such a crazy time in our existence. But is it fair to say that the pandemic is what led to what became, say, Black August? Like, would we have Black August if the pandemic didn't happen? Like, I'm curious, like from that perspective.
Yeah. No, we would. I mean, the pandemic happened prior. You have to remember the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, Black August was already a thing for 3-4 years. We absolutely would have Black August in the park. Period. Yeah.
So let me ask this, because this is where because I do remember Black August being a thing when I moved back. You being at the palace and doing an event like Black August, I guess I'm curious, like, did the vault come before Black August, or did Black August come before the vault?
Yeah, the vault was before Black August as well.
Okay, I'm looking at your this lead up of like ideas that led, because in addition to Black August, like you're doing other things entrepreneurially, right? So in that time period, what, like, in addition to Black August, did you kick off anything else, or was that really the start of kind of venturing outside of the family business?
So I looked at the vault and the palace as a stepping stone to what's up, Finks? That's my guy right there, man. Finks, shout out to you. He's currently the DJ at Gojo, where if you haven't been, you gotta go Friday, Saturdays. My man does his thing. But started off at the restaurant at the Palace International. My man, we were at the same apartment complex, and Kevin literally would chase me down because he knew that I was doing events. And this leads back to what you're asking about, because he was like, Moses, man, I see you doing your thing. We need to have an African night. We need to have an African night, man. We need to have African night. And at the time, like I guess I had kind of like, I had tried it previously, but there just wasn't support. And I was like, I don't know if we're there yet. My man was persistent, and Finks was like, no, let's do it. And because of his persistence, and I think because of his passion and his love for like connecting the diaspora, is the reason why I was like, you know what, let's do it. And we started Africana nights at the palace. At the time, he was just getting into DJing, just working it up. And I think that his passion, I saw his passion and I felt his passion in the way that he would like talk and spin his music. we kept going, and I was like, you know what? Even if there's 3 people here, we're gonna do this every Friday. It's
Word.
beautiful. It's so beautiful to see like how much he's grown as an artist, as a DJ, and now at Gojo, the place. If you go on Friday, I mean, it's packed out. It's beautiful. I just want to give a shout out to Finks Entertainment for that reason. Kevin, yo,
Word
you're doing
up.
your thing, man. Respect. But to get back to your question, like what I did at the Palace for a very long time is what I utilized the restaurant and the space, the vault, to get out my dreams and to do things that I wanted to see. Like to go back to like college, I always wanted to do grassroots movement in a way that connected the diaspora as a whole. Because of my connection to both worlds in America, the continent, I saw like in a unique way how we were so similar, and although different, there were like ways that we should be connecting, you know. And I used the restaurant to me as a gateway to introduce people to East African culture, but to African culture at large, and to recognize that we are one and the same in various ways, and to introduce folks. I think for so long I've heard like my friends who've grown up here, like they felt like even if they were interested in African culture, they felt like there was a gate there that they weren't comfortable like walking through. I think it's beautiful for you, for instance, that you've taken the time to like go and visit and enjoy the continent. I talk about this so often with like my Africans who have grown up here from a young age. I think that interestingly enough, like when we were growing up here, we were outcasted in a way that oftentimes we were ridiculed for being African.
Mhm.
And I think interestingly enough, as we've grown, I think we've held that on our shoulders. And what's happened is that a lot of Africans have like almost like spit that back at Americans oftentimes in a way that like almost like is like, yeah, we're African, or like we're better than or different than, in a way that I think has, hasn't done anyone any good, honestly. And I think that for me it's really been like important to me to make sure that I've created a platform, a space, and a culture that respects each other's culture, whether you're from the Caribbeans, the Americans, European or African continent, that we recognize that we're together in this fight for liberation. It led to me creating events at the Palace, the Vault, that I think spoke to that, whether it was around culture, food, music. I always wanted to see people coming together to create, like, to be, in a space that's joyous, that's in love, and that's like growing like each other.
What you said is fair, but I also know
Oh, here we go.
I also know, having friends, African parents can be quite strict sometimes, and even discriminatory towards Black Americans, I'll say.
You're being
I have to
respectful, and I
say this.
appreciate
I
that,
have to
yeah.
say this.
Nah, you should.
I'm curious, just from your experience, right? Like being born in Durham.
Crystal Taylor, this is my co-founder of the Black Farmers Market and Black August in the Park. I love you, Crystal. Keep
Shout out
doing your
to
thing.
Crystal.
She's also the founder of Beats and Bars. Respect.
Shout out to Beats and Bars. But we're not gonna deviate here. So what I know is for a fact that I know my Africans friends' parents. One, we had a bad reputation because we had their child doing things that the American boys was doing. The American boys, but also too, I know there's often like a pressure to like keep it within the bloodline, like go get you a Kenyan girl, go get whatever.
Not just a Kenyan girl, from your tribe.
From your tribe. Okay, I appreciate you. I'm curious, did you have any sort of pressure like that growing up in terms of how you socialized and who you dated and so forth?
There's 2 different answers to that question. The last one is no. My parents were extremely liberal in comparison to other African parents. And I think that has a large part to do because they had a club in Durham, North Carolina. So they were always, they saw each on both sides of the situation. From when I was a child to when I got married and chose my wife, they were incredibly liberal, and I think very like progressive in how they looked at my partnership or who I should marry. Right, Beverly, my sister, she can vouch for me. I think that in respect to your earlier question, like in terms of like how Africans see African Americans, I think that is valid. I think that Africans come to this continent with the same type of like propaganda that, is
Right.
prominent in America, right?
Right.
They see African Americans the way that they're depicted in mainstream media, which is not good. They come here, and I think with good intention, trying to protect their children from what they see propagated
I don't
in
blame him. I
mass
wouldn't be
media.
one associated with that either. Be like, no, 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 hold on, not my kid, like not my kid. Don't put him in that category. Like
Yeah.
we good, we
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
The same thing. Like you read stories about Gandhi, who has this reputation, but then when he went to Africa, he was like, hold up, Brits, let's be clear. Let's be clear here. We not savages like these. We better than these. Like it's like let's
Yo,
separate.
read up on it, yo. Gandhi
Yeah,
was
it's
the
like
same way. Like he changed up when he went back to India, but in South Africa he was like that too. Yeah, and again, I try to be. There's an understanding that comes with that, but what I do, and I think what hurts me is I don't put blame on my parents or their generation. I do expect more from like first generation Americans who grew up in America,
real
from
African Americans, so to
Exactly.
speak. Yeah,
Well, I
that's
don't
what
even
I
want to
would
say real African Americans, but just say first generation Americans.
see because I do think there because like look, I'm a mixed breed man. If I look at my ancestry.com, it's not just African. It's all kind of all mixed in. But why do say because I look black, I have to be called
You are
African American, but the whites don't have to be called like
you
Europe
are black. I
American.
just want to say that. I just want to throw
No,
that
no,
in there.
like,
Not look
I
black.
know what I am, but that's what I call myself. I
Yeah.
call myself black because that
Yeah.
was created here. I don't
Right.
really like the term African American because
Yeah.
you don't have to be African to be black even here. If we're gonna be honest, like
That's fair. That's fair. So let me tell you why, and I know a lot of African Americans and Africans will disagree with me, but I think that it may be time for a new term, which I would love to talk about with people who are willing to, but what at the core of whatever the term is from yesteryears to whatever we decide tomorrow, I think that there should be a connection between the fact that we all stem from the continent, right? And I really appreciate the fact that like in the thought of African American, the title, the idea was like, yes, you're American, but your ancestry is African. And I think you can go like, PhD on us, but at the end of the day, we are all one people. We all come from like the same people. And I think that because we've been, and this is not just on African Americans. These are Africans and Africans. And I think this is not spoken on enough. The fact that we are oppressed in our own country among Black people.
Right.
Because white people or colonial or empires still have a hand in our economy and way of life.
I call it remote slavery. I call it
Yeah, and there's
slavery
not
from
enough.
home.
Exactly. It's real. And it's so real in a way that I don't think that we're going to overcome until we realize, like, look, we're all the victims of the same system here. And we have to figure out a way to come together in order to figure out how to like relinquish these chains or overcome this system. So I respect and understand why African Americans can be a bit like, all right, like, there's a lot to do. That's a big term, but I think that the idea is very important, and I think the future of where we are going as a diaspora is really it stems from us being one and the same, and I honestly think that African Americans, as the traditional terms, like I really feel, and this is me coming as a first generation, I'm going to distinguish myself as an African American and say I'm a first generation, but I really feel like the leaders of that movement will come from African Americans connecting with African brothers and sisters and saying like, yo, y'all lost. Let me educate you, because we've been through the ringer, we know what's going on, because on the real, a lot of Africans are oblivious to it, because
no question.
we've come up from that colonial system in a way that we have distinguished ourselves from African Americans. And I think that African Americans will be the one to lead a revolution, honestly.
I agree.
And how we see blackness in the world.
I agree with that. One of the things that if you read Marcus Garvey's stuff, he, as a Jamaican born person who has such an influence on African or Black American history, so to speak, right? He's not born here. Without Garvey, you don't necessarily get Malcolm. You don't, whose parents were a part of his organization. And Martin Luther King is cited as referencing Garvey as the first Black man who put together a movement in the United States that was worth something, that like put the thing in his brain. But this is a who's Jamaican, right? One of the things that Garvey wrote about was just how in those early years, the 1800s, when he traveled, he went to London, he went to all these different places, but it was only here, even in those 1800s, like where he saw affluent Black communities. He didn't see that in London and other places he went. It was here when he came to the United States where he saw like Black communities, affluent families. Like he saw something that didn't exist. It was a unicorn. And when we look at least from my experience when I traveled,
Yo, G, I'm gonna stop you because I know I told you I'm gonna probably have to take a restroom break.
This the perfect time. All right, yeah, this the perfect time. So let me do this because this is good. So for those of y'all listening, we're gonna take a little small break here. We're gonna play some music here in the background for y'all. We're gonna take a little small break. And then we'll come back and finish up the rest of the episode. So if y'all listening, matter of fact, man, if y'all listening, especially right now, hit the subscribe button. Don't even play with me right now. Hit the subscribe button if y'all sitting around listening. I appreciate y'all. This is the G Podcast where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. Make sure you subscribe. We're going to finish this up when we come back.
Hi, Flyer 87. How you doing out there?
All right.
Doing an intermission system check.
Quick little break. We'll be right back in a moment.
How you doing out there, Jake? Make sure you're staying hydrated from these. Remember, you're high class. You gotta realize that you're gonna be an entrepreneur. So pollinate.
Stress, thy enemy. Thy remedy, that Mary Jane, my melody. Your company is all I need.
Stress, thy enemy. Thy remedy.
Living. Everywhere I go, I keep it roll with me. I be moving slow, but my mind zipping. This is from the soul, like your mom's kitchen. Now I done felt the pain, cause that thing illegal. Had to get a lawyer, had to pay some people. Had to tell my moms I got caught by the cops. And she helped me out when I needed a lot. Now her boy grown, still smoking on pot. Lived in Amsterdam, got a master's in high. Out in Spiegel Scribe, I was puffing that lie. Plotting on a plan and I rose to the top. Now I get the munchies and I eat charcuterie. High class, it ain't nothing new to me. You see these other daytime foolery. I'ma keep smoking till the day God through with me. speaking of high class. Sip that high class too, man. Old Hillside. Make sure y'all go grab that. All right, y'all. Appreciate y'all. All right, and we back, man. Like we never left.
What up? What up? Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate that break. Appreciate that break.
Nah, man, I gonna lie. Like, I'm really enjoying this, especially as somebody who had that real estate downtown at one point. Like, that's a nuts. Like, yo, that is a flex, low key. The fact that, like, yo, that is a crazy location. That is like just something I'm gonna be sitting here thinking about, especially my wife being in real estate commercial these days. Man, yo, that location is something else. So a lot of gems here, a lot of nuggets. The background in terms of just the family environment, the entrepreneurial environment, family business, how that led to even just you trying to come back and be your own entrepreneur and create your own things. We were talking a little bit about just how like there is often a disconnect between what we call, say, Black Americans versus the actual Africans from the continent, because they often fall victim to the propaganda that gets put out there from the country. I want to kind of move on from that and get to like present day, in that in addition to the Black farmers, or excuse me, in addition to Black August, which I like that it's called Black August, not African American August. I just want to say that I like I like that term, because again, I have to say this people might not agree, but that term African American in a place like America, how it's used, it doesn't fly with me personally, because nobody has to identify as Asian American, Mexican, or Mexican American, South American American. Like, they don't have to identify as continent American, nor do individuals have to identify with like a nationality in any sort of way. But when you look like you or you have to latch on to this thing. Whereas for me personally, I know generationally, I did one of my family members did an ancestry thing where we looked at the family tree, and they found an ancestor that goes back to the 1865 census, which is crazy old. And that ancestor is on the census as what we call, and it's on the document on the census. Like, this is like an 1865 document. They didn't even call this Black. They called him mulatto. Like, that was what he was called on the document. Mulatto husband, mulatto wife who had mulatto babies. And so for somebody like myself who descends from American slavery, the pathway to where we come from is so like convoluted that I know, because of how I look and just the flavor I have in my presence, that I descend from a certain place. Like, I know that's a big piece of who I am, but I don't know where that place is. I don't have much connection to it. It's been stripped away. We don't get to keep those traditions, those tales. Like, a lot of that was stripped away. Calling myself African American when I have, like, I don't know the connection to that place. I'm more here than I am there, because, at least in my head, this experiment of America is like, I'm not saying I'm a test tube baby, but like Black Americans are like the ultimate test tube babies, like socially engineered from the start. You don't survive without a certain level of strength, without a certain level of endurance, because of just the conditions, right? Like, you're literally socially engineered to be the best of the best, to produce unlike anything else on this planet. For me personally, I feel like that journey of lineage to call it simply African American does not really speak to the accuracy of what was done here in America when you descend from American slavery. So for me personally, I don't like the term African American, because my parents weren't born in Africa. Their parents weren't born in Africa. Neither were theirs or theirs or theirs. I'm like a 6th generation descendant from slavery, and we don't even necessarily know not just what tribe, but what country, what piece of the land. We've done Ancestry.com, but that's only accurate to a degree. These are things that, moving forward, just as somebody like myself, having friends who are actual first generation African Americans who know their tribe, who know their family land, and can go not just 5 generations, but exponential times that, 15-fold generations of where they started, how they migrated, got there. Like these sort of tales, man, I almost envy it, if I'm being honest, as a Black American, because I have friends who are first generation Americans who descend from Africa, and they know all these tales about, they just go so deep into their history. Whereas with me, I feel like it stops at a cutoff, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but it is something that I hope that as we grow, we can help each other learn more about those backgrounds and bring it all together. Because right now I would say there's definitely a huge disconnect, and we don't I don't necessarily know what the answer is, how to bring that together, but I do wish we have more conversations like this that just make it more comfortable for people to express that and figure out how to bridge that gap over time.
Right. So let me ask you a question. So this is a while back when I was talking to a friend of mine who is African American, Black American. I was actually, so he was telling me similar things that you just said. He was sharing with me why he has an issue with the word, but more importantly, why we should be distinguished between the two of us. And I mentioned to him, I was telling him like, everything that you're saying is true, but I think what's also true is that Black Americans here, the descendants of ancestral Africans, have created their own culture that have become, I think, more or less the envy of the world, for real. Like in a real way, including Africans, right?
Yeah.
Has created a culture, traditions in their own right, through those several generations. And I was more or less like bigging that up and saying that, that's a culture that I think that is a new root, more or less, that we can grow from, and that you could grow from. I got a backlash, to say the least. It was more like, he was insulted because I was telling him like, you all have created more or less your own culture in a way that, like, it's true. You all, in terms of your ancestry, have been stripped from where you come from strategically, and
It's been very intentional along the way.
Very intentional, right? But in doing so, have created your own culture outside of that.
1,000%.
And I was telling him, I was like, yo, so you all have created your own culture. There is a culture there, right? That I think should be like uplifted, honestly. There should be a pride in that regard. And his reaction to me was like he was insulted. And I wanted to get your feedback on that, because I think that, even though I can go 15 generations back and say, oh, this is where we came from and this is why we have these traditions, like 15 is 15, 6 is also 6,
Sure.
Traditions start from somebody saying, this is what I think is the best thing to do, and people follow suit. And I'm just curious, like, what your thoughts around saying, cool, but we do have our own culture, right? And bigging up that culture and creating like and saying, like, as you create your generations 2, 3, 4, 5 after you, saying this is the culture that we've built. Like, what are your thoughts around that?
I think the most valuable asset in America, or the most valuable export, is Black culture. That's the most valuable asset that the country has worldwide. It has global currency. You go to China, you go to Japan, you go to Singapore, you go to Africa, the dress, the flavor, the style, it often mimics what starts in these urban Black American cultures, whether it be a LA, a New York, a Detroit, an Atlanta, Houston, etc., right? Or even a Durham, because Durham gets credit for the lingo around here.
Let's
go. A lot, let's just be clear. Bruh is our word. We get to claim that. Yeah, we get to claim that, right? So I agree that we have a culture as Black Americans that is very valuable and should be celebrated, no question. So I agree with that. I don't take offense to that at all. Like, I don't think that's even controversial even. in my opinion. Like that's very much the case, what you said, in my opinion.
Okay.
Where I think it becomes where I think it starts to become more divisive than constructive is where when you're Black, but you don't live in America, you don't necessarily understand like Blackness yet until you get here. I don't give a if where you are in the world, that pride in being Black doesn't really exist until you're in America and you're forced to feel what that's like, in my opinion. Okay. Because of that, what often happens is you have Black immigrants who come to the United States who often share the same mindsets as white supremacists as it relates to Black Americans and culture and so forth.
Due to propaganda.
And then what typically happens is they will feel what it's like to be Black in America eventually.
Get pulled over. They're like, but wait, nah.
They're gonna feel it. But here's the thing, right? There are communities, little Haiti, little this, little that, like these immigrant Black communities still find ways to keep their heritage protected, to keep their cultures protected, to create their bubbles of protection so that they can continue to do what they do as a community. And it doesn't necessarily include someone like myself in that bubble. What often happens is, in my opinion, that's one of the disconnects in the diaspora, is that America is so open and Black Americans are so, and then you get indoctrinated and you're able to tap in and claim some of that while also keep us out from some of the growth that you're getting while leveraging the flavor that you get from being here in America. You can still be in this bubble of immigrants and be surrounded by Black people and nobody there descended from Black slaves to some degree. And I'm not saying that's always the case, but I think as someone who grows up here, when I see these communities that pop up and these why is it, in my opinion, that these communities pop up and they seem to be able to develop businesses, infrastructures, even at a small scale, and they don't even necessarily seem inclusive to the Black Americans in the area. It seems more like their insular bubble and adjacent to like white America while we're on the outside. That's my personal experience and opinion on that matter. And I think that as it relates to how you position it in terms of like how you mentioned what I think what you said is true. At this point in time, there's now new generations of people who have been born here, first generations, and they identify as Black Americans, rightfully so. You grew up as a nigga, like you know what that's like. You know what it's like to just, I see you and now I think something about you. So now you know what Blackness is sort of like rooted in. It has nothing to do with where you're from. It's all about this look on your skin. It's nothing else to it. For those individuals to identify with Blackness, but not have the same obstacles that come with Blackness in some respects.
Why do you think they don't have the same obstacles?
They're often not the same because generationally, so for example, I'm the first person on my father's side of the family to finish high school. So generationally, when you descend from a class of individuals who were always left with the least and intentionally cut out of other situations, whereas when you come over as an immigrant, it's not quite the same, in my opinion, in terms of your access to education and opportunities.
Well, why do you think that is?
So why do I think that is a great question.
Hold on. Let me be more succinct. Like, so you're saying what I hear at least is that immigrants coming here have more access to education than the folks here.
I think so.
All right. So tell me why you think that is.
I think in part because the value culturally that has been established, culturally speaking, the value of education means more oftentimes to an immigrant than it does to someone who is Black American, I would say. The importance of college and career and even a level of the standard of what you should be doing once you become an adult. I think that these cultural standards are different than when you come from some other families that have been over here generationally. Now, why that is, we could discussed, but I do think there is a different perception in terms of the value of an education and the idea that you're even expected to approach a certain career. I think that is a difference.
I agree with all of that. I agree with everything that you're saying, but I guess, inevitably what comes, like, if we talk about the solution, because oftentimes, you know what, like if I'm speaking for the immigrant side, we become, because I think it's fair to say that in our background, like education is put like, like, hey man, this is what you got. This is what you need to accept. This is what you need to do. This is the bar. We're not going to accept anything under that.
Right. It's not even expecting. No,
like
you're not coming home.
But like when I look at that on the other side of things, if I'm looking at like a Black American,
and we are generalizing, so
we're generalizing.
We're generalizing. Let's be clear. We're generalizing.
We are generalizing, and that's on both sides, by the way, too. Because I think, like, let me speak from like as an outlier from the immigration side. Like I told you, I spoke earlier how like I feel like my parents were very liberal. I think that as African parents, when I hear the stories of my peers who were African first generations, like my parents were chill. Like like they raised us well, but they didn't like push us to say you better get an engineering degree.
But what about going to college? Was college?
I didn't even. That wasn't even a question for me.
You were expected to go to college.
It wasn't even it's not even like I was expected. To me, I looked at college like you look at going from middle school to high school. That's just what goes next.
Yeah, I didn't view college like that, for example.
That's how I view college. I never had a conversation from my parents like, yo, so gonna go to college. This is what we're expecting. This is what we're doing. It was just understood like that. And maybe that was just the way I was brought up and all that stuff, but that wasn't even a question.
See, this is where I say it speaks more to class than anything else, as I've realized as an adult, because growing up, like neither one of my parents went to school. So by nature of that, like then there's not as much emphasis or expectation that college will be in your path if your parents didn't go to school, for example. And unfortunately, historically, in the Black community, we've been some of the more undereducated and underserved communities in America. If you live in those communities generationally, unfortunately, there aren't like a plethora of individuals out here doing things outside of the neighborhood. Like the expectations are minimal to some degree, not as much as like a race thing, but I think it has to do with the average socioeconomic class of Black Americans due to what we come from,
right?
Due to intentional barriers being put up to get access to quality education, to getting access to quality opportunities, redlining, etc., like eugenics, like so many, like the list goes on as it relates to how Black Americans have been targeted by the federal government to like do damage. Like it's unquestionable.
No, I agree completely.
Because of those realities and in the historical context, like, it's like the lighter you were, the more likely you were to own land. Right? If you were the master's son, but you were a slave and the master died, you might have got hooked up with 10 acres over in the corner over there somewhere because he was like, no, make sure my boy get that. Whereas the other slaves on the plantation didn't get anything. But because your mom was raped and you were born and you have this bloodline from the owner, now you're inheriting something that automatically separates you from the rest of the people that you were just peers with, so to speak, right? Like these little things are such a real piece in why certain Black people have wealth and certain don't. It's very much based off of like an inheritance thing. Because we didn't get our 40 acres and a mule, but there were some people out there who did get something inherited to them. Right. Why they got it, who knows? But more than likely, they were related to the master of that plantation. And that person looked out for them when they died. And then they gave them that land and then they figured out what to do from there forward. Same thing here in Durham. I'm going on a complete tangent now. But Durham, like,
go ahead, do your thing.
One of my biggest issues with the city of Durham is how cliquey it is amongst Black people.
Oh, man.
It is super, super cliquey amongst black people. It's very classist, in my opinion, amongst black people. And there's a very clear line of you're a little too Durham versus refined Durham. Like, you see, it's like you laugh, but you know, I know you know what I'm talking about. Like, there's a line and there's a divide, and it's very clicked up, and that bothers me to the core. Like, that's one of my I never did the gang thing. I never did the fraternity thing because I hate this idea of cliques. Like, I don't do the religious thing. Like, I don't do anything that by default puts me somewhere that now, because I'm a part of this, I can't do other things. Like, and I feel like Durham as a city is so cliquey, it divides us more than it unifies us. Now that's my personal opinion. You as somebody doing business in the city, doing events in the city, would you agree or disagree with that? With that, how I describe Durham as a cliquey type city?
No, I agree with you completely. I think that I would follow up with that by saying that even before New Durham, which I call New Durham, let's use our watershed moment, right? Like, even before the watershed moment, Durham was still very much a cliquey city. So I agree with you, but I don't want to give the impression that, like, you know, this happened with New Durham. Like, I think that like you're cut from a different cloth in that I think that you have been in several different cliques, right? I feel like you've been around several different people and you've also, as you said, consciously have not put yourself in circles, right? Like, I don't want to be a part of this clique, you know? And I think that that's unique. I think that's very unique, actually. And I feel like I'm cut from the same cloth. At least I try to be. You know, most people, unfortunately, generally are not. You know, I agree with you completely. Durham was like that before and that right now. You have your haves and have-nots. You have your Durhamites and your New Durham. I call them Durham, like the people who know, you know. But unfortunately, I don't think that there's been a space given for folks to actually like cultivate like at least real connections around all those different circles. So
I agree. In the long term, I think that's what I want to try to contribute to, because to this idea of being classist, Durham is more stratified. Like the city, man, like you can't afford to live here no more. Depending on the average person that grew up here when we grew up, say in the early 2000s versus now, what it took to raise a family in Durham versus what it takes today, everybody's priced out. It's so expensive here. It's a class thing. That's why I think there's often a disconnect because of the classism that exists here in America, whereas when you come over to America, depending on where your starting point is, even if you come over here with nothing, you're like starting net zero versus in a negative, which a lot of Black Americans who've been here for generations, unfortunately, they're at a negative trying to get to zero. And I think that's like it causes more like crabs in a barrel mentality of people being in the same area, fighting for the same piece of the pie. And it causes more division. So to your point, I don't think we have enough safe spaces to build on that level. But to me, that's the next evolution of what Durham is doing, cutting through the classes of Durham. Like, I think Black August is a good example of that, because when I go to Black August, I see all types of at Black August. Like, real talk. Like,
that's the goal. That is the goal.
I see from the bougies to the earthy crunchies to some gangsters over here on the side, to like some grannies and grandmas. Like, I do see like a mix of folks at Black August that kind of cuts through like the classism of everything. And
that's beautiful to hear, by the way.
That's
that's one of our values, I have to say. It's one of the values of Black August. We were founded on several values, but one of them is all of us. And by that, we mean everybody has a different path to liberation and what that means for them. And oftentimes in these circles, it can be very like, this is to be liberated or free means you need to make this much money, or you need to have this, or you need to do this, or you need to do it like this, you need to eat like this. And I think that what we have strived to do as a collective is make sure we create a space where no matter what your sex orientation is, your class, how much money you make, where you come from, you feel like as a Black person that this space is for you. That's beautiful to hear. That's exactly what we strive. And honestly, as we continue to grow and get older, it gets harder and harder because people want to box you,
Right, right.
They want to box the event and say, oh, this is this type of event. It's for this type of people. And I feel like we oftentimes, as a group, as a collective, try to figure out how we can combat that and make sure that everyone feels welcome. So I appreciate you saying that.
No doubt, man. And I think that's a good way to kind of transition here to close things out, because like this event, Black August, I know it's a group of individuals, and can we just shout out their names again?
Absolutely.
Of who's responsible for helping put this together. Can we shout those names out again, please?
Yeah, so currently right now is Janelle Henry, Crystal Taylor, myself, Moses Ochola. But I also want to shout out the founding members who include Derek Beasley and Joshua Gunn.
Shout out to Gunn, JHS. Like
exactly.
I actually remember
Jordan out here.
I first met Josh. I had a drama class with Miss Hines. Shout out to Miss Hines. But that's where I first met Josh in drama class when he was a senior and I was a freshman.
That's
and,
the homie. Also an Aggie alum. Respect.
That is a fact. That is a fact. That is a fact. Very interesting. I'm gonna have to reach out to him to get him on a pod sooner than later.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
sir. My man in Indiana, you know that now, right?
I know he moved to the Midwest.
Yeah,
But see, that's like a whole other conversation too, because I'm gonna save that. I'm gonna save that because I'm just gonna save that because I watch people from afar.
Yeah.
And especially somebody like him who's had success, I would say, as an artist and branding himself in that way, but being able to play kind of both worlds along the way. I think that's worth having a conversation.
Has always put Durham on his back too, by the way.
He's definitely been at the forefront doing that for sure.
Yeah.
That's dope to hear. A community of a clique of individuals coming together to put this event together.
All with
for
our
the
own.
city.
We had our own things going around too. Like I had the Palace, obviously. Crystal had Beats and Bars and was doing several things around the city. Janelle had her own event thing that was going on. Cardinal Events, Derek and Gunn both had their own thing going on. For the fact that we came together, very different individuals. And also, like, I would say that I think the beauty of us coming together is we all saw liberation differently, Black August, and I want to speak to this too. Black August in the park stems from the tradition of Black August, which is its own thing entirely. Started in 1979, which is, quite frankly, to specifically show love, appreciation, and celebrate the liberators through the diaspora who have fought for Black liberation. It stems from George Jackson, and y'all can read up on this later. I don't want to preach to y'all, but I do want to make sure that I like shed light on that, because what we do at Black August in the Park has stemmed from that. We honor that legacy by creating a space to exhibit Black joy, because we see it as Black joy as a it's a resistance, right? Us being joyous, us coming together, us loving each other, is resistance. We the roots of Black August is something that we take and really, 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 really try to uplift honorably, and also put our stamp on it by saying, like, all right, what does this look like in the future, right? It started in the 70s, has grown and continued, but like, how do we put our stamp on it to make sure that the people coming after us connect with it as well? So, yeah.
But no, man, that's dope, man. It's money. Like, it's definitely a dope event. People have met their wives or partners there at the event. Black August in the park, creating Black families in Durham. Like, it's a beautiful thing. I have to say, it do be hot than it be.
Yes, it's hot. It's gonna rain.
year,
Every year it rains though. You notice every year it rains too?
Yeah.
Every year it rains for like 30 minutes. I also want to say for the youngins out there, we go until 11 o'clock at night. So come through, it's multi-generational, but come through.
For sure. That's coming up on the 26th. In addition to Black August, though, now tell me if I'm wrong, but is it the same group of individuals also responsible for the Black Farmers Market that's in the area, or who gets the credit for that light bulb as it relates to the farmers market aspect?
Yeah, Black Farmers Market is the same individuals as well. That was a bit organic. I think that so what happened with Black August in the Park when we first met, we had several Black people coming out. We strictly have a no vendor, like retail vendor policy. It's only food. We had all these Black businesses coming to us like, yo, like we need a space to, you got all these Black folks and we need to be supported too. So what we did, and this is 2015. So if you can go back to a time where Black Friday was still a thing and people were lining up at Best Buys, we said, hey, look, instead of y'all supporting these big box stores, let's support Black businesses. We created the Black Market that following November, Black Friday, right after Thanksgiving. And that was a huge success. It grew up until 2018, where the farmers came out to us and said, we see y'all doing this work and we're out here suffering as Black farmers. We had a specific Black Farmers Market that inevitably continued to grow. We essentially, instead of doing two events, combined the Black Market to Black Farm and Black Farmers to just the Black Farmers Market. And we, from 2018, have continued to grow. We became a nonprofit officially last year. Yeah, respect. Yeah, shout out. We need those claps. We expanded to Raleigh very quickly. So right now we are in Durham and Raleigh every other, alternating on Sundays from 1 to 4. Durham, we're at Durham Tech. Raleigh, we're at the Southeast YMCA on Rock Quarry Road. Please support. Yeah, but it's the same individuals, man. We're continuing to grow and we're looking for partnerships all the time. But
and if anybody listening was looking to get involved, partner, what would be the steps to make that happen?
So I want to stress that with Black August in the Park, we are just looking for food truck vendors, and we are coming to the deadline of being a part of this festival. But the best way to connect with us, if you're interested, is blackaugustnc@gmail.com. You can also link or DM us on IG at Black August. And for the farmers market, also you just connect via email, blackmarketnc@gmail.com. So
okay, yeah. Word up. Do y'all happen to do any like winter events? Or like I'm curious, like especially like from a Black August standpoint, I'm like, do y'all do like something in the winter when it's cold, or is it just strictly Black August?
Right now it's just Black August.
Okay.
For now. Stay tuned though.
Stay tuned. Word up. Yo, man, like the conversation has been great. I could definitely keep going, but I'm gonna hold off here because honestly, I can foresee you coming back on. Maybe even.
Oh, I enjoyed it, man.
I'm gonna reach out to a few of the individuals because as you mentioned some names, some ideas come to mind. So I'm gonna reach out to a few of these individuals to get them on the pod as well. But I would love to have maybe y'all on as a unit to talk more about some of the things y'all are doing in the community.
That'd be beautiful. Yeah,
I think that'll be dope. But from your perspective as a someone who grew up in a family around entrepreneurs, who got your own taste of entrepreneurship, I'm just curious, like if there's anybody listening out there, there's any last words that you could leave someone with who might be thinking about how to start something up, how to get something going. Are there any last words that you might could leave somebody with if they're in a position and they're thinking about like, how can I get this from an idea to something that's actually moving? Like, what would you say would be some of the keys to do that?
So my first word of advice would be honestly to just do it. Honestly, I think particularly as entrepreneurs, artists, creatives, visionaries, you have this idea in your head and you're like, it can't be done unless it's done this way. And I would say that's the enemy, right? So as long as you're doing I think that's more important than it being done the way you see it. I think that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself and my team, who are always looking for partners, but oftentimes people look for handouts. They haven't done any type of creative stuff or event, and they're like, oh, I have this idea and they want to work with us. And I'm like, yo, like, you gotta, like, I can't, it's hard to help someone who hasn't done the work. You understand?
Mhm.
So I think that most important to anyone who has a vision and an idea is to make those steps to try to see it into fruition. And I think through that journey, there are multiple people who will help you see it through, but you have to take those first few steps. And I think by any means necessary is really important. Oftentimes you got to kind of step first before you know how it's going to get done. Jump out the plane and then build the parachute.
Right.
There's a lot of internally you have to go through a lot, but I think that fighting through that is important. And that's what I would suggest.
Word up, man. I appreciate that insight. Look, man, Black August
Yes,
coming
sir.
up in the city. August 26th.
Saturday. Let's go.
Saturday.
The last Saturday of August. Please, y'all.
Is it always the last Saturday, or is that
Not
just
always, but the
Okay.
last 2 years it has been. I will add to that, like, y'all, please, we got merch that just dropped on our website. Come through, please cop it to support. Make sure it continues to be a free event.
Yo, so I'm gonna need to get the link to the merch so we can throw that in the description here moving forward. Drop it in, at least in the comments for everybody.
Sir.
That said, it's a free event, everybody. So if you're
Yes,
out there
sir.
listening, and
Please
you within
come
a
through.
2-hour drive of Durham, it's worth your time for sure. Like, that's what I can tell you. If you
Yes.
within a 2-hour driving radius and you ain't got nothing going on the 26th of August, or even if you got something going on, you might want to postpone those plans, rearrange them,
Amen.
and make your way to the city, because it is going to be a festive event. And it
Yes.
will be magnificent. Is there anything that you can like speak to that people can expect this year at Black August that you can give us? Is there anything you can give us here?
And if you haven't been to Black August before, just imagine being at a family reunion and feeling like everyone is your brother and your sister. Like, it's beautiful. I can't honestly say to see a Black folks that just love each other. It's beautiful. I don't know how to explain it until you're there.
It is a unique experience. If you got any questions, we're going to put that link in the description so y'all can grab that. Otherwise, y'all got a social media for Black August as well, right?
Black August NC.
Black August NC. We got Moses' social media right there in the link. So if you follow him, you'll definitely get those notifications. This is the G Podcast, where we focus on family, friends, finances, freedom, and our future, and everything else. Moses, greatly appreciate you joining. If you still listening, make sure you subscribe. This is the G Pod. We gonna see y'all on the next one.
It doesn't matter how you feel.
No talk about it. You see me blink yet?